My name is Kate McCauley and I am the Chief Executive at Housing Rights. We are an independent charity. We work to protect and promote people's rights, and primarily how we do that is by providing advice, by providing advocacy and assistance, and we also use the experience of the people who contact us for advice and our own expertise to try and influence and improve government policy and to effect change. Good Friday Agreement contains a number of reaffirmations of the rights and entitlements of people in Northern Ireland, specifically with regards to what it says about housing and about our work that we do, about people's right to a home. The agreement contains a commitment that people have a right to be able to freely choose their own place of residence, so freely choose where they live. The agreement also contains a number of related areas which I think are really critical to that right around housing. It contains a commitment that government will take broad policies which improve economic stability and promote social inclusion. So really they will try and improve the standard of living and promote inclusion so that people can live freely together in communities and feel safe. And for us that's really important, because the idea of being able to freely choose your own home, this idea of choice, for very often for very many of the people that we help at Housing Rights, their parameters for choice have been narrowed significantly, and one of the big determining factors around that is poverty. For us, we see on a daily basis the link between housing circumstance and poverty. I suppose since 1998, and I think it was really important that following the agreement, the Northern Ireland Act introduced a legal duty on public authorities to take account of the need to promote equality of opportunity in key areas, and those functions, the functions of government departments, the functions of statutory authorities in relation to housing. So that means that when they're making decisions about housing, they need to be considering who is experiencing inequality, who's not being able to access the key promises around housing, whether that be around accessing housing, around being able to sustain your housing, or around the adequacy of your housing. So really, in real terms, what that means is the decisions that government make around the ability of you and I to be able to find and keep a home that meets our needs. So in all those decisions, it's really important that government are considering who is facing inequality and what policies can they introduce which will better improve their chances of being able to access and keep a home which meets the needs of their families. I suppose for us at Housing Rights, as an organisation that has existed now for almost 60 years, we have seen the journey that Northern Ireland has made, and since 1998 it is fair and accurate to say that there have been significant improvements for very many people. We have seen the introduction of new laws which better protect the rights and entitlements of people who are homeless, people who are living in the private rented sector, where very many of the people who contact us for advice live. We have seen the introduction of policies and practice which have improved the standards of living and improved access to advice and support for people as well. But it's also very true to say that for many people, their experience has not improved in the way that the Good Friday Agreement imagined that it would. And I think a really good starting point for that is a piece of work that the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland did back in 2017. So following quite a comprehensive look at who is facing inequality in Northern Ireland, they produced what they called a key statement of inequalities, and it identified a number of groups who were not being able to find and keep a home that was suitable for their needs in the way that they should be able to. And you can look at that on the Equality Commission's website, but to give you a flavour of some of the things that it talked about Catholic households, for example, continue to wait longer than other households on the social housing waiting list. It talked about the experience of Irish travellers, members of the Irish travelling community who have not been able to access appropriate accommodation that meets their needs in the way that the Good Friday Agreement would have envisaged. It looked at the experience of newcomer or migrant communities, people from minority ethnic communities, and people from LGBTQ plus communities who very often will not feel that they are able to live safely in their community because they're subject to racist or homophobic abuse, and that impacts their enjoyment of the right to housing and their enjoyment of that ability to be able to freely choose their own place of residence that the Good Friday Agreement talks about. I think at Housing Rights, the majority of contacts that we have with people across Northern Ireland who are seeking advice, the key issue first and foremost for very many years, but it's become most acute in the last maybe 5 or 6, has been the issue of affordability. People simply cannot, very many people, they cannot afford to find and keep a home that meets their needs. We see that particularly acutely for people who are renting privately, who are on low incomes, whose area of choice is quite narrow to begin with because the local housing allowance that they receive is insufficient to be able to meet most rents in Northern Ireland. And they're having to subsidise that out of their own pocket, and that's placing huge challenges for them on their family life and on their ability to be able to maintain that home for their family. We're also really conscious that the backdrop to all of our work in housing in Northern Ireland is the huge demand for social housing. In Northern Ireland we have around 45,000 people who are on the waiting list. I think the problem is particularly acute for some families. It's mostly families and singles who are on the waiting list. And I read statistics that were published last month which really focused in on people who are living in temporary accommodation. Far too many people are waiting far too long in temporary accommodation before they can move on and find a home which meets their needs. And I think it is particularly worrying and particularly concerning that many of our children, I think around 4,500 children are currently living in temporary accommodation in Northern Ireland, which is just not right. It's not good enough, and I think it's definitely not the promise of a bright future that the Good Friday Agreement envisaged for us.